Welcome to the Millennial Sandwich, a space for real conversations about millennials in the middle, not just of our own lives, but also of a caregiving sandwich. I'm Dr. Anita Chandra, a geriatrician and expert in elder care.
And I'm Zara Hannawalt, a parenting journalist and expert in American motherhood. And even we don't have all the answers. Join us as we figure out life in the middle. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. It's Zara and Anita today without a guest. And as we are winding down our first season, we've gotten a lot of feedback from all of you about how important it is to thinking about how your parents age before there is a crisis, before there is something disastrous that happens that makes you wish you had set certain things in place or started to think about certain things beforehand. And as a geriatrician, this is something Anita talks and thinks about a lot. We're going to talk about aging today. And so we thought we would talk about some of the things that you all can look out for as your parents age, things that Anita looks out for in her patients and her parents.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have this conversation. I think aging is totally having a moment right now. A lot of the conversation, though, is about longevity and what we can do to live as long as possible and the science behind that or the not so science behind that. My focus and what my goal is in this conversation and my practice is how to think about aging well. And the way to talk about that is to understand what aging looks like in the first place. So in the sandwich generation, we have aging parents. That's part of the definition of the sandwich. And that's sometimes as far as we get in the conversation, right? We don't really talk about what it looks like because aging can look like so many things, and the help and the care that someone needs as they age can look so different across the board. So a lot of us are just unprepared for what to look out for, what can be normal, what can be prevented. I think this is a good place to start that conversation.
Yeah, I think also a lot of us are so preoccupied with raising our kids that we almost, one, don't have the time to look out for things. And two, I think we're very inclined to notice something, but kind of send it to the back of our brain and forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
For you, what is an example of something that you can notice and hold off on? And what's something that you think people need to act on right away if they notice in their parents?
Yeah, so I think the big thing is the noticing at all. There isn't really something or red flags really to look out for that automatically means something is wrong. So first of all, I don't want you to hear this and think that it is your responsibility to watch your parents like a hawk and interrogate them and notice every little thing they're doing. That's not the point of this. It's really to start thinking about just noticing in general, noticing how they're living and how things are changing. So I would say something that would require paying a little bit more attention or digging a little bit deeper is if you notice that your parents aren't doing the things that they used to do that they want to do. So adaptation or choosing to not do things anymore is different than not being able to do things. And that's really where the difference is that I want you to look a little deeper. So if your mom has gardened for 40 years and she looks forward all winter for it to be spring so she can get back in the garden, and she's not doing that anymore, and she talks about missing it, and she talks about wishing that she could garden, or maybe she doesn't talk about it and you're just noticing that she's not doing that. That's a change. And over time, if she continues to not do the things she enjoys, that's what I would look for. So over time, changes that show that they're not really being themselves as you know them.
What's behind a lot of those changes? Is it more pathological? Is it more just a lack of confidence? What is it typically?
It can be so many things. I can walk you through sort of what I'm thinking as I do a general assessment. So because there's so many different, my brain is just thinking like this is like a flow chart, and it can go 100 different ways. So the unit of measurement when we think about aging is not really age. I've said this before on this podcast. I say this every day to my trainees that your chronologic age doesn't really tell me anything. It just doesn't. Sometimes it can tell me I have to change doses of your medications or like some organs work differently, boring stuff. But as a person, when I'm looking at aging, it doesn't really matter if you're 70 or 90. I'm looking at function. So everything that I am going to talk about today in terms of what we're looking for is about function. And when I say function, that means being able to care for yourself. So it can mean as nitty gritty as like, can you brush your teeth and can you feed yourself and can you take a shower? And it can mean things like, can I get to choir practice? Can you, go play cards with your friends? Can you go to work? I mean, there's so many things. Function means something different to each person. So when I say notice a change, it can be a span of things, right? It can be like, I've noticed that my parent just isn't doing the stuff they want to do. Maybe they're not working the same way that they used to. Maybe the kind of schedules have shifted. There's so many things that people come to me with saying, I've noticed that there's a change. So in terms of why, sometimes it's normal aging. The composition of the body changes as we get older. And, depending on what the activity that we're talking about is, muscle mass changes, for example. Depending on how your body is adapting to the things you're doing, some of the change can be normal. Some memory decline even can be normal. Sometimes people will come to me and say, I can't remember names anymore. I mean, I did remember after a couple minutes of thinking about it. Like, that I'm not really concerned with those kind of things. So I can't point to things and say, that's definitely a red flag. You are dying. You're like, something is wrong. But if there's a change over time and the change is interfering with how you want to live, that's what I'm going to look for. Yeah, it could definitely mean that there's a physical illness. It could mean depression. A lot of times in older adults, it's a mood disorder that's untreated that you see come out as a change in function. It could be something like a dementia or some other, cognitive issue. It could be medicine. It could be sleep. It could be so many things. And in geriatrics, that's what we're trained to do, is to tease out why it's happening. Always asking that why, because we really don't know until we start digging into who the person is and getting into more details why that might be happening.
What about something like retirement? Do you see a lot of that happening where someone retires and suddenly they have like this total personality change, or there's like a marked change in their energy levels or their motivation to get up and do
Yes.
things?
Often we will see someone's decline soon after retirement. That's not necessarily because of retiring, though. People who have risk factors for declining, if they're already at risk for dementia, or if they are already putting themselves at risk for things that look like dementia by taking dangerous medications or not sleeping or all these things. Sometimes when we lose that structure to our day and we lose the purpose of why we're getting out of bed in the morning and not having something that keeps us kind of tied to being alive. And that's when you start to see that decline, because there's nothing covering. Oh, so we call that reserve in geriatrics. Lots of things can affect how much reserve you have. Some of that is, like I said, you have risk factors. Some things we can't change. So we can't change our genetics. We can't change our age. A lot of diseases are not preventable. It's not like you did something and then you got this disease because you didn't do something right. But there are a lot of things in our control that I think we don't realize about aging. And that is what we're doing now in our 40s, 50s, 60s. So somebody who is highly educated, for example, or very socially connected, or doing something that brings them joy, and that becomes part of their day-to-day life, and working. We love to hate working, but working really does keep our brains and bodies active and gives us, sometimes if you're doing something that gives you a purpose, that can be helpful. Exercise. I mean, we all know that none of us are lifting enough weights or eating enough protein, but unfortunately that is like a big piece of what keeps our reserve robust as we get older. And then as we get older, if we don't have that large reserve, a thing like retirement or a fall or a pneumonia that lands you in the hospital, you might see all of that decline that's been kind of staved off for years just come out, because there's nothing holding it. It's sort of like a dam that's been released, because everything that you've built to be that dam is now not holding back all of the water. So then we start to see that decline. That's not to say that it's, once that happens, you're done, it's over, there's nothing you can do. I'm very optimistic about aging because I understand aging, and I think the more we as a whole understand aging, the more optimistic we will be about getting old.
I mean, there's so much fear of aging too, right? And I think that for so long, it was this idea that once you hit like 40, you're done. You're over the hill. You're gone.
Mhm.
Just like retreat into your home, go into a corner, you don't have any place in society anymore. And do you think we've overcorrected in the sense of like now people all want to hold on to this idea that they are young and that they are vital? Is that factoring in here? Is that a part of why so many of our parents are resistant to listen to us when we tell them that they need to do things differently?
I think that's definitely part of it. I also think there is something, I don't know, about the baby boomer generation is very set in their ways about a lot of things. And I was actually just talking to some friends about this, how I think our generation is so used to being vulnerable and understanding our own limitations and sharing everything that we're going to go in the total opposite direction when it comes to our aging. And yeah, our parents' generation now is having a hard time with understanding that their bodies are aging. But here's the thing, they didn't just start aging. They didn't turn 60 and start aging. All of us are aging. Even if we look super hot right now at 40 years old and we're the fittest we've ever been and we look young and we are doing all the things the kids are doing, our bodies are still aging. Our bodies don't care what the trends are and what we're doing. We're all aging and it's totally normal and natural. And if we understand what's happening and how to keep ourselves strong to continue to be ourselves, I think it'll be different when we get to our parents' age.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? We did a whole episode about how the cultural context that we grew up with is affecting how millennials move from early adulthood into midlife. And I imagine that the cultural context is just as influential in how boomers are moving from midlife into late life, right? Also, there was a global pandemic that completely altered our social patterns, our day to day habits that we still haven't come back from.
And it aged people a lot faster than many people probably would have because we basically forced isolation. A lot of people had COVID and had bad COVID, lasting effects from COVID, maybe cognitive effects, physical effects. We talk about this in COVID kids a lot and the effect that it had on their isolation and how they are going to interact with their peers and how they're going to learn. It's the same. We are, none of us are immune from that. We all are going to have effects from being socially isolated. Even the way that we interact, even the way we order food now, right? It's completely changed the way we interact with other human beings. Yeah, we're going to totally see that as we get older. And also the way we think about what it means to be old, that hasn't changed in a way. If you ask somebody our age to picture an old person, a lot of people will describe somebody maybe with wrinkles, white hair, maybe they're not walking, maybe they have a walker and they're not doing things. They're just an old person. They're
Mhm.
not thinking
Yeah.
about a person as being themselves but older. So when you think about aging, do people think that it's like a switch that's one day you're yourself and then suddenly you're an old person?
But quite honestly, if you think about the media that we grew up with, just like
Yeah.
we were thinking about how it was like teenagers dress like this and talk like this and act like this, and then parents dress like this and act like, then it was grandparents dress like this, act like this, talk like, right? Everyone was so segmented by generation. And we grew up seeing these examples of old people who were categorically in every way different than middle-aged adults, right? Like they spoke differently, they looked different, they dressed different, they moved differently. They had like a completely different sense of humor and what is appropriate to say. And you know, that there's some truth to that.
Yeah. I think the ageism is rampant in the media. I
Yeah.
mean, the way we think about sex, for example, in older adults, there is this shame and disgust associated with older people having sex when the research shows that people in their 80s and 90s are still having sex, whether it's in the nursing home, whether it's, whatever their situation is. And when I say that, the first response is like, ew, that's gross. But that is because of what society has made it. Because an old person is supposed to be old and they're not supposed to do any of the stuff that makes them happy.
Isn't it interesting that we have more distaste for that than we do about sexualizing teenagers?
Yeah. I mean,
Like, did you watch The Golden Bachelor by any
no,
chance?
I didn't. There was a similar show on, I mean, it wasn't The Bachelor. I never got into any of the Bachelor series actually, but there was a dating show on Netflix with older people that I liked that one.
It's really interesting because the whole premise of that show was to frame old age as a phase in life where you could still crave romantic connection and you could still be desirable and have desires. And the first season, they cast this man who, he wore a hearing aid, and there was a lot of talk about the normalization of that. Their next season, they cast the youngest woman from that show as their Golden
Yeah.
Bachelorette. And then the third season, or the second Bachelor season, they cast a man who talked about how his ideal woman who appeared on the show would be like 45.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, we actually took a step forward and then we just took a bunch of steps
Because it
back.
probably was so off-putting for so many people, whatever their ratings were, to see an actual older person being old on
So what's
TV.
interesting is they got their best ratings in that first season
Wow.
when they actually did it the right way and when they actually had some of the right framing. That's when they did the best. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting because it's just it's a gap, right? It's a gap between what people actually want to see and what we're still able to kind of wrap our heads around.
Yeah. And you said that the show kind of showed that you could still want intimacy, love, connection. And when I hear that, I think they should. They do. They should want all of that, because going back to the aging well, that's probably one of the biggest hallmarks of healthy aging, is still having close connections, intimate or not. If that's what fills that cup for you, then yeah, those close connections. The romance doesn't go away. There are physiological changes in the body that might change what physical sex looks like, but nothing happens, nothing changes in terms of intimacy and romance. And that's all made up by our own discomfort and how that's doesn't suddenly go away when you turn a certain age.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, when they hear the phrase aging well, they think looking a very specific way. And a lot of times that's looking a way that's altered, right? With like Botox and fillers. And what is your definition of aging well?
My definition of aging well is someone continuing to be themselves the way they want to be. Being able to do the things that bring them joy and purpose in life, no matter what it physically looks like, physically in terms of appearance, but also function. It totally depends on what matters to each person. And if you're able to do the things that are important to you, I call that aging well. And that's different. That can be different. There's no right or wrong to that for anybody. It could look totally different across the board, and my recommendations might be totally different. But if I say that someone is aging well, that means that they're on their way to reaching their goals.
Do the signs of aging look different in men versus women?
Yeah, a lot of times. I will say men, sometimes we see them later in whatever they're presenting with, just because they don't go to the doctor unless their wives or women in there. We've talked about this so many times. If the women aren't bringing up the issues, men aren't really doing it. But in the hospital, I wouldn't say there's a huge difference in how men and women present. There is a big difference in terms of people's community or their family is a part of their life.
Interesting. So what does that look like between men and women?
I think less so than the patients, but like I said, if there are more women involved in the care of the patient, things are just taken care of. Somebody knows the medication. Somebody knows who the doctor is. Someone knows. And of course, this is not always the case. There are men who take wonderful care of their family members, but the majority is women who are taking care of the patients I see in the hospital. And they're the ones who are able to answer the questions that I need to know.
Do you see a difference in how men and women maintain friendships as they age?
In the generation that I'm taking care of now, who are in their 80s, 90s, not really. I think that they're generally much better at keeping longer term relationships than I would say we are in our generation. So many of my patients are still getting lunch with their high school buddies, and that has a lot to do with, we've talked about how our generation has moved away from where we grew up and seen more of the world, and we have lived in different places. So that's part of it. A lot of my patients have not left where they grew up. So their relationships are decades long, sometimes their whole lives. And that's amazing because they have these supports that they just know are going to be there They understand, there's ebbs and flows. It's sort of like they understand that, yep, that's part of life. And they were part of my circle and I love them. And yeah, they are good at friendship. They are good at friendship.
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole episode's worth of opinions about why millennial friendships are so different. Also, I think neighborhoods function differently.
Yeah.
I think we feel very disconnected even as neighbors now, especially if you live in a big city. I mean, I I lived in a condo building for many years and I didn't know who lived next door to me. Like,
Hmm.
yeah. What can we do to kind of avert that as millennials?
I think we really have to make a conscious effort to remember that our village isn't going to suddenly appear when we're 80 years old, when you need people around you who know you and who would notice a change in your function. And it's okay if you're in a season of life that you don't have all the time to focus on friendships and relationships in that way, but knowing that it's not going to happen on its own. It takes effort to be a friend and allow someone to be your friend. And
Yeah.
we're not good at that.
We're really not. I mean, I think in the parenting world, there's so much talk about the village. And every time I see it, there's a clear misunderstanding of what a village is actually supposed to do in your life, especially in your first few years of parenthood. Again, I think we could do a whole episode on that. It's probably too much to get into here, but there is such a misunderstanding of what a village actually is, what it's supposed to
Mhm.
do for you, what you're supposed to do for it. And yeah, I mean, we live in a really hyper individualistic country. I think that how does aging look different here than it does in other parts of the world?
Yeah, like you just said, we are so focused on independence and the individual and being able to not accept any help. I think if you ask a lot of people what it means to age well, they might tell you, yes, the physical stuff, but also that someone doesn't need any help from anyone at all. And I don't believe that's what independence is. I said that we focus a lot on function. And when we say that people are able to do things for themselves, we call that independent. I don't think when we say someone is independent in geriatrics, we're not saying that they don't get or accept any help, because that's really not what that means. Sometimes accepting help allows you to do the thing to be independent. And that's something we need to untangle as a society too, that accepting help from people around you, people who want you to thrive as you age, can be independence. That is part of allowing yourself to be independent. I think with our parents' generation, it's tough to bring it up to our parents when they
Yeah.
see independence as, I don't need any help. I've made it this far. Don't worry about me. I don't need anything. So,
Yeah. I mean, post Depression United States, our parents didn't grow up in the United
yes.
States. So I think they have a slightly different relationship to this. But in the years after the Depression, independence was really hailed as the ultimate badge of honor and the ultimate sign of Americana. It wasn't even just this thing that was glorified. It was this is what sets us apart. This is what makes America, I don't want to use this phrase, but great.
Yeah.
It was that ethos was really drilled into people.
Yeah. So I talk a lot about what to notice, what changes are concerning. And then I'll hear, okay, but then what? Because my parent doesn't want any help. They don't want me to do anything about this, so I'm not going to do anything about this. And it is hard because you're worried about someone, you love them, and it seems like they don't want you to bring it up at all, and you feel like they're being stubborn. So common, and I think we as adult children really need to understand what the appropriate way to come to our parents about our concerns is. We talk about this with our children all the time. I mean, we know exactly what to say and how to say it and validate their feelings. And do we do that with our parents? Most of us? Absolutely not. We don't. And it is a lot of the same stuff. If we come with a recommendation and we come at it like, you are going to get lost and you are going to kill someone, you have to stop driving, is that person going to feel good about that suggestion or automatically shut it down because who are you? I'm your parent. You can't tell me what to do. If we come at it by saying, I love when we get to go out to dinner. You love that too, right? That's really important to you. Do you feel like it's getting harder to do that though? Because, when it gets darker, it's a little bit harder for you to drive. Giving a suggestion by shaping it through their goals and shaping it through the lens of what prolong their independence can change so much. I'm not equating our parents to toddlers. That said, the way we talk to our children and validate their feelings and validate their responses and can anticipate when they might react with a tantrum versus when they might be open to a suggestion and giving options, we can absolutely do that with our parents. We totally can. And I will be the first to say, I'm not good at this. I am actually terrible at this. Just like we talked about with Mona, it's really hard to not revert to your self from when you were a child feeling unheard with your parent. So it's really easy for me to say all of this stuff. And it's really easy for me to do this with my patients, not so much with my actual parent.
Yeah. But also, like we talked about with Ellie, we are giving so much of our patience and our emotional energy to our kids that often there's just not a lot left when we turn to our parents. So,
Yes. And I think a lot of us think that when we talk about having conversations with our parents, they're imagining this big sit down where we have to have hours and hours of a serious conversation and talking about you're getting old and I want to be prepared. And that's not at all, I think, how we should think about this. My goal is for people to understand basic things to look for over years of time so that when you're having these conversations, they're like just happening in the background of your life. They're maybe happening while you're cooking dinner and talking to your mom on the phone, or you're driving home from work and you're just asking things, normal things like, I noticed you didn't go to whatever today that you normally do. You didn't go to the gym. Is that something you don't like that anymore? Or why aren't you going? Just being curious about the why. So sometimes I'll see people in the hospital and they'll tell me that my mom hasn't done that. She used to go to bridge. She hasn't done that in months, and because she doesn't really walk anymore. And then when I say why, it's like no one has ever asked them why. Or a lot of it is like, oh, because she's 80. So there are things that are common in aging, but certainly not normal. So as a geriatrician, I'm always asking why, because it makes a huge difference. Even the driving thing, that counts in my functional checklist, right? If they're not driving, they're not considered to be fully independent, or if they don't have their own transportation, they're not considered to be fully independent. But that said, why? Sometimes it'll be like, oh, they moved to the city, they take the bus now. They don't need, that doesn't count as a change that means that they have lost function. So the digging into the why goes back to everything. Function, like I said, knowing someone's baseline. And when I say baseline, I just mean knowing them, like knowing them as a person. What are they like? I don't know. If I'm meeting them in the hospital, I don't know them. I'm going to look to their spouse or adult child or whoever knows them. And maybe that's you. You might not be with them all the time, but you probably know them. You probably know what makes them laugh, what they hate. Maybe they watched a loved one go through something awful in the hospital and you know how they felt about that. All of that stuff is so much more important than what I can tell you in terms of what medication they may need or not need right in that moment. I think as adult children, we don't know the power and the importance of how we know our parents can play in the role of how they're taken care of by anyone in the medical community.
yeah. We've been asked a lot about how people can take care of their parents from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are actually at a little bit of an advantage if they're taking care of their parents from a distance because they can see their change over time instead of seeing it day to day.
Sometimes, I wouldn't say an advantage, but I would also say it's not a disadvantage. People will say, I'm not there. And there's a lot of guilt around that. There's a lot of, I can't do anything about their aging because I'm not there. I only know what I know on the phone. I will say in 2026, we have a lot of resources that mean we can do a lot of things to help our parents from afar. In terms of siblings, that's really important to know, is that just because one sibling is local doesn't mean that the responsibility to do all the things should fall on them. If you don't live in the same city as your parent, you could still notice things on, say, a video call. Even just taking a look at the state of the house, watching them walk on a video call, those kinds of things. But even more practical things like ordering groceries or helping them with finances or ordering medications by mail, helping them book appointments. I mean, there's so many things now that we can do remotely. There's so many things that we can do. My biggest piece of advice, if you don't live near your parents and you want to know, the most important thing to know if something goes wrong is you need to have eyes on the ground. And what I mean by that is whoever your parents are spending time with, or who they would call in an emergency, or who they're inviting over for dinner, that's who you need to be in touch with. You need to make that your community too, because they're the ones who will notice if people are doing things differently. They might be the one to bring it up to you that either I notice they're a little slower, or they're repeating things, or they didn't show up to our pickleball practice or whatever. Those people are the people you need to have in your phone to be able to answer the questions. So say something happens and your parent has a fall. When they come to the hospital, the medical team will ask them all kinds of questions. So things I ask in the hospital are, can they do these things for themselves? What medications did they take? Have there been any changes in their mood, their memory, their appetite, all these things that if you don't live right there, you might not know. But if you can call someone who sees them for lunch every 2 weeks, or spends time with them, exercises with them, then you have those answers. You just, it's maybe through a middle person, which is totally fine because you're still getting the information. So that's, I think, the biggest thing to start with. If you don't live in the same city as your parent, find out who they're talking to and make a connection with that person.
When do you have to start thinking about doing those things? Just making those connections, or just starting to pay more attention?
I think when your parents are 50 and 60, that's usually 50 or 60, that's generally when they're going to show you what is important to them in terms of activities, energy. I'm not saying they're old then. I actually don't think people are old until they're like 95, but I don't think it's ever too early to know your parents' friends and who is important to them and start just talking to them about like, what do they picture their life looking like? You don't have to wait. Certainly don't wait until they're 70, because that's when things do change kind of subtly in the background. Ideally, yeah, when they're 50 or 60, many of us are not thinking about that when we're like maybe in college or something. When our parents are 50 and 60, we're not worried about them aging.
Which is probably a piece of it, right? I mean, when you have kids in college, you have the most agency over your life.
Hmm.
And that's why it's so obvious what you actually like to do and what you want your day to day
Yep,
to look like, as opposed to when you're 35 and you're
exactly.
raising toddlers. And
And your
yeah,
work life is maybe winding down. I mean, probably not anymore, but at one point that was the case. Yeah, so it's really just all about learning who your parent is as a person, not focusing on like what their blood pressure is and did they take their medications. Like, yes, that's part of it that maybe will come after there's a diagnosis or something. But if you're trying to support a parent aging well, you just really want to know who they are as a person. That's the most important thing.
which is hard, right? Because you know them as someone who you're trying to get away from
Mhm.
almost much of your childhood and your teen years. And I think you and we spent so much of our teens trying to get out from under our parents' thumb.
Yeah.
And now what we want to do is have more time with our parents, right?
Right.
And so I think there is that sweet spot in the middle where if you're lucky, you will get that time where you don't have to worry about them every second of the day, but you can get to know them as a person and not feel like they are always over your shoulder, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I don't want people to listen to this and think that they should be worrying about a parent. I mean, a lot of us are anyway. Even if you notice the changes, that doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong. Even if you notice that they're not driving anymore, or they're, taking more medications, whatever the change that you're noticing is, it's not necessarily always something bad or scary. Just noticing the pattern over time is going to help get answers more quickly when you are worried. That doesn't mean that we have to just be nervous all the time. And going back to how many parents don't want help or don't accept help, sometimes there's nothing you can do about that. It is not always our job or our right to have a say in how our parents live. They are adults. They are allowed to make even bad decisions. And now that's different in the case of somebody who might not have medical decision making capacity, maybe somebody with cognitive impairment, and that's a different situation. But for the majority of older adults, they are absolutely allowed to do what they want to do as long as they can continue living relatively safely. That's the part I think that is really hard for adult children is we think we know what's best. Maybe we do. Maybe we do know the safest answer. Maybe we do know this would be a lot easier if they just listened. And sometimes we can't make that happen. But knowing all of this and knowing kind of the path, it's sort of like when we watch our kids grow up and they're going to make mistakes but they'll having that door open when they do need help is huge. That's huge. Knowing that they know that you're there, they know that you care, you know them, you know what is important to them. When they're ready to accept the help, they'll know that they can come to you and it won't be some big surprise that they're declining. And I think being open and not forcing people into accepting help the second you decide it's necessary is huge in actually being able to help them eventually.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to do a little rapid fire, and I'm going to list off a few scenarios, and Anita is going to tell us if those are normal aging or a sign that maybe something is not normal. Forgetting someone's name and remembering it later.
Normal.
Repeating the same question several times in one conversation.
Maybe not normal, worth looking into.
Walking a little more slowly than before.
Normal. All right. I think the biggest takeaway is that you don't need to become an expert in aging to help your parents age well. You just need to know them, know what they love doing, what their normal looks like, who they spend time with, and start noticing when those things change. You don't have to fix every change, and you definitely don't have to wait for a crisis to start paying attention. We barely scratched the surface today, so send us your questions about your parents and aging, and we would love to keep this conversation going.
Thank you for listening to the Millennial Sandwich. Don't forget to like, subscribe, give us a rating, and connect with us on social media.